Another thing to pick up in terms of a criticism around Saudi Arabia, Carl Froch was at a boxing writers club lunch earlier this month, and he was quoted as saying, boxing's being ruined by Saudi Arabia at the minute, the money is killing it. That was the article here.
Well, he's a former boxer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Was he against boxers earning money?
I'd have thought not.
Do you think? Could you imagine him saying that if he was fighting? He is the most miserable bastard, green-eyed guy ever been in the sport, and I don't understand why he makes these comments. Maybe it's to get his YouTube or whatever you call it, as his podcast numbers up. He's always had a green eye towards other fighters, and I think it's very, very sad. But let him get on with it. If he begrudges boxers a profession that he earned money from earning money, that says a lot about him.
You actually did an interview with me about Carl and the Calzaghe fight,
Yeah.
which didn't happen. He went on TalkSport and talked about this. I drove to London to speak to Frank Warren. He told me to forget about fighting Calzaghe. It's slander on my name. I'm surprised someone of his age would come out with these pure lies.
He drove to London. He's battered old car. He said, didn't he? Because you told me this, so I've got the quote. The only reason I went down to London, a 3-hour drive, because I was the mandatory for the belt. So why would I go down if I didn't want to fight him? It's rubbish. That's what he says, yeah? So we had that meeting on the 12th of July in 2006, according to my diary. At that time, Joe was the IBF and WBO world champion. He beat Lacey on the 4th of March in 2006, and Froch was ranked number 10 in the IBF in March 2006. At the time of meeting Froch, he was the British and Commonwealth champion. I'm looking at notes here because I have to write this down because I'm an old geezer. IBF number 7, WBO, he was ranked number 3, and in the WBC, he was ranked number 3. He wasn't mandatory to Joe Calzaghe at all. Using his word, he's a liar. So go and dig the ratings. I've got them here, if you like. I'll send them to him. He was never the mandatory when he came down to fight him. March 2007, he was number 2. In April 2007, at number 3, he was calling for an eliminator. He weren't calling for a fight with Joe Calzaghe. Because if you're the mandatory, unless somebody can show me any quotes or anything, or any letters that he wrote asking as a mandatory to fight Joe Calzaghe when he came down to meet me, then I'll apologise to him. But there aren't any because he wasn't mandatory and he weren't asking for it. He was calling for an eliminator against Dennis Inkin, so he could become a mandatory. So the winner would become a mandatory. At the time, the last mandatory defence by Calzaghe was against Jeff Lacey, which is in March 2006. So he had a year anyway, roughly a year before his due number. But he was not the mandatory, so that's a nonsense. It didn't become mandatory until September 2007. So that's well over a year after that. It was about 15 months later. And in November 2007, they had the final eliminator against Inkin with the winner to fight Joe Calzaghe. That is what happened. They're facts. They're not in his mind. They are facts. You can go and check them out, or if anyone wants to look at it, I'll stick all this paperwork up so they can look at it on our website. Joe Calzaghe, after the meeting with Froch, who, by the way, offered him his career best ever purse, which, if you put his last 4 purses before I made the offer, you put them all together, and it was still more money than he'd ever earned, what I offered him. But he didn't want it, and all he kept saying to me was, when is Joey going up in weight? That's what he kept asking me. When is he fighting at like a heavyweight? Then Joe went on and fought in October 2006. He fought Beaker, good fighting Beaker. Remember Beaker had him on the floor in that fight? Then he relinquished his IBF title, Joe, rather than fight Robert Stiglitz, because we were looking for a different fight. He then fought Manfredo, and then he fought Mikel Kessler in 2007 in a unification fight at Cardiff. Massive turnout and a great fight, a real good fight. And if you think about Carl, who fought Kessler, he got beat by Kessler in 2010, 3 years later. He always talks about how he beat Kessler. He forgets about when Kessler beat him. He fought Kessler and beat him in 2013, which was 6 years after Joe beat Kessler. And I don't think Kessler was the same fighter, by the way, after he fought Joe. Joe relinquished his WBC super middleweight belt in 2008, not 6, rather than fight. In 2008, and he fought then Roy Jones. Sorry, he fought light heavyweight ring belt. Before that, he fought Hopkins. Yeah. And I'd done the fight at Planet Hollywood with my mate who owns it, Robert Earl. So that was a sequence of fights. That's what happened. And as I say, when we met in 2006, he had the British. He fought in November 24th, 2006. He fought Tony Dodson. That's who Carl Froch fought. Then he had the IBF Eliminator, and as I say, he weren't the champion anymore. But then he fought Robin Reed and Riaki. That's what he did. And then he signed with Matchroom in 2011. And then he called Bernard Hopkins, Joe beat an old man, Bernard Hopkins. Well, Bernard Hopkins, after he got beat by Joe Calzaghe, fought the big American star at the time, undefeated, Kelly Pavlik, and beat him, the old man. Beat him. Then he beat Roy Jones again. Then he fought Pascal. There was a no contest. And then he beat Cat Pascal, same Pascal who Carl fought. And then he beat Tavoris, sorry, I'm going backwards. Then he fought McLeod. Then he fought Shumenov. And then he fought Kovalev and lost to Kovalev. And he was an old man when he was fighting those two, no doubt about that. But that old man, one person who didn't fight that old man was Carl. He chose not to fight him. He was offered that fight and didn't take it. But the fact of the matter is, all what I've told you is the truth. 2006, when we met, he was not the mandatory. He's a liar. Sue me. And you keep on telling lies, you have to get your nose done again. Wind up like an half-chewed wine gum the way you're going on.
Okay.
Right, well, I don't know what to say about this. So, 2006, I wasn't mandatory. So what? Big deal. I think what to take from this is there's two things. One is accusing me of ducking Joe Calzaghe and saying I didn't want to fight him. I duck no man, nobody. Just don't duck people. I fight everybody, mandatories, younger, 10 years younger, people who are dangerous, Olympians, unbeaten fighters. I take zeros for fun. But to say that I didn't want to fight Joe Calzaghe is ridiculous. He offered me the information that Calzaghe is moving up to light heavyweight, to which I was gutted. Why did I go down to London to speak to Frank Warren? I had my advisor with me, by the way, who I can talk to and verify all this. He was on his own, so it's 2 against 1 if you want to go down that road, which we don't, because it's boring me now talking about it again. But anyway, in 2006, I wasn't mandatory. 7, I was mandatory. I then had to wait over a year, politics in boxing, whatever. Joe Calzaghe vacated. Probably Frank that was behind that, but he vacated on the final day. He waited until the last day to vacate the title. So I had to wait for the longest period possible. He was told, you've got to fight Froch. Froch is your mandatory. You've got to defend against Froch. He waited until the final hour to vacate. I then fought for the vacant title. But this is the interesting thing about all this. If I went down to London, which I did, to speak to Frank, which I did, and I was worried about fighting Joe Calzaghe, which I wasn't, that's a lie, then why didn't I sign with Frank Warren? They give me this contract. He talked about he's offered me 4 times my biggest career payday. Let's say my payday. Back then, my biggest payday was the British title. It was about 25 grand back then, my British title was. It wasn't mega money in boxing back then, actually. 25 grand for a British title. So if he's offered me 4 times my career biggest payday, 100 grand, 25 times 4, easy maths, then why didn't I take it? Or was that 100 grand for a world title? Because that's not the best money. When I fought Jean Pascal, it was for a lot more than that. So I don't know what his point is saying. I offered him the biggest career payday up until now, 4 times his biggest purse, even though he wants to know what my biggest purse was, even though I've just told it at the time, British title, whatever. If that's the case, why didn't I sign with him? Frank, why didn't I sign with you? If you've offered me 4 times my career payday, you've told me Calzaghe is going up to light heavyweight, why didn't I sign with you? Because I got a bad feeling in there. I work on instinct. I've got an intuition. And I didn't sign with you. Didn't happen. The contract went straight into the David Brent filing cabinet.
How many times have I told you there's a special filing cabinet for things for head office?
Straight in the bin. Bosh, straight to the recycle centre. And yeah, I then got on with my career. So that's just a point I wanted to bring up. If it was that great and you was paying me that well, why didn't the signature happen? But it's boring. I definitely did not swerve Joe Calzaghe. I don't swerve people. I fought Jean Pascal, unbeaten Canadian Jean Pascal, for the WBC world title that Joe Calzaghe vacated. Don't ever tell me or anybody else that I did not want to fight Joe Calzaghe, because you're making yourself look stupid. And when you do it, your face is all red. You're hyperventilating. You're going to give yourself a hernia. You're like a racing car in the red. You can fucking explode. Nobody wants to see you explode. So just calm down, chill out, have a drink of Corona. Enjoy the sun. Enjoy your life. You've got to be 70 years old now. You've had a great career. You've done well. But anyway, just stop talking about me, and I'll stop talking about it. I think this is the last time, actually. I've exhausted. I'm really bored of it. So yeah, that's the end of that one. Let's move on. Hopefully that's set the record straight and that's got it sorted. Oh, another thing I want to point out, that interview you did.
It's still going.
That interview you did. Yeah, I'm on one. That interview you did with Umar. Have a look at it on YouTube. Get a look at it and have a look at all the comments underneath. You know what I should have done? I should have pulled the comments up and read it. You know, if I'd have read the comments out, I'd have looked like a bully. The comments are so bad. Another thing I will say about Frank Warren, when you're giving fighters stick and saying, oh, you pulled out the fight, you didn't want to fight him. Boxing has got to be the toughest sport in the world. You know, when those fighters climb up them steps onto that ring canvas, where do you go? Where do you promoters go? You go down the stairs and sit on your comfy seat ringside and enjoy the night. We're the ones expelling blood, sweat and tears and putting our lives on the line. So you want to be careful and think about what you're saying, because it's out of order giving any professional fighter at any level any kind of negativity or stick or criticism, especially a Hall of Famer that's finished. And I beat the game. I broke the code. I got the cheat code. I busted the matrix. I left the game with my faculties intact, with my Hall of Fame ring, 4 world titles, and I'm just loving life. I think it was Joe Fraser that said, it's the only sport in the world where your brain gets shook, your money gets took, and you can end up in the Undertaker's book. And that is true. And it's worth thinking about when you're giving fighters stick. Stop doing it.
Carl Froch. I see that side.
Listen, it's just hearsay. At the end of the day, my record speaks for itself. Undefeated, 46-0. You know, beat the best in the world. What can I say, man? Like, there's a lot of people can say, anybody can say anything. There's a lot of fighters that say could beat, and it's one of them things. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk, and have to go in the ring and do the business. You know, he's a good fighter. You know, I was a great fighter. Undefeated. What can I say? Lemmy was world champion, mate. I'm happy what I've achieved. Happy what I've done, and the legacy lives on, mate.
If I boxed Joe Calzaghe back then, this is how it would have gone. 2 possible outcomes. Joe Calzaghe would have either beaten me on points, because he's very fit, he's very strong, he's a very good fighter, or I'd have chinned him. I'd have knocked him El Sparka. I'd have backed myself to knock him out. I think the Calzaghe fight should have happened, and it should have happened for the fans, and it didn't. So I'm totally blaming Joe Calzaghe on that, because I think he knows he would have got cobra'd.
Carl Froch, Tyson Fury could be in a 12-round disaster against Usyk because of his inactivity. Tony Bellew says Fury's making really poor decisions. His reputation's being tainted. So you're getting big figures like that talking about him in that manner.
Big figures to who? Big figures in my eyes. But anyway, let's answer all them. So was the first one was
Johnny Nelson.
Johnny Nelson, right. So John, you may remember I was your promoter when Naz begged me to sign you all those years ago, and I wouldn't do it. And then Brendan come on, who was your manager, asked and trainer, begging me to sign you, and I did. Because I remember Naz and Brendan sitting in my house saying, come on, will you do something? And your mate at the time, I know you don't speak that much now, but I remember Naz at the time said, please, come on, Frank, please help me do something with him. And I remember it's the first time I ever used the phrase, if he was fighting in my back garden, I'd close the curtains. And the reason I'd done that is because that terrible fight you had, which knocked boxing off the box on terrestrial TV against Carlos de Leon, which I'm not sure, it weren't quite as, well, it was a little bit worse than the Akoli fight. That Akoli fight, which was a snooze fest. So then, we gave you fights and you done well. For 8 years you held that belt. And then when it come down to the nitty gritty to defend it against a fighter who was hot at the time, knocking everybody over and was a really hot fighter and went on to win the world title, is a mandatory defence, John. That was against Enzo Maccarinelli. And what did you do? You retired. So please don't. Come comparing where you are, and I promoted both of you and Tyson. It's not even an issue. I mean, Tyson's sold more fights at one arena than you sold in all your fights combined. So please, we don't need your thing, John. Love you dearly, but stop talking bollocks.
Carl Froch.
Oh, okay. Carl Froch. Carl, I'm going to remind you now, when you met me in the Polo Lounge of the Westbury Hotel and brought down your financial advisor, and we were trying to make the fight with Joe Calzaghe, the fight everybody wanted to see except for you. Because all you kept talking about, is he going to go up in weight? Is he going to go up? When's he going up in weight? Because you didn't want to fight him, Carl. And you know what? Something else I just want to remind you is, do you know Tyson sold 94,000 tickets at Wembley?
He's not going to like that one. And obviously Tony Bellew's been very vocal about Tyson as well.
The wisdom of Tony Bellew, forget about it. I'm not going to go there.
Froch won his third version of the world super middleweight title when he stopped previously unbeaten Lucien Boutte. It was a fantastic performance. Carl is a quality boxer. This week the debate has raised about where he stands compared to the other great British super middles. Now I decided to go to the top, and earlier I spoke to Joe Calzaghe. He went unbeaten in 46 fights, made 21 defences of his world super middleweight title, and he's generally regarded as one of the best fighters of his or any other generation. Now, I started by asking Joe if he had watched Carl's win, and if he had, what were his first impressions?
Yeah, well, obviously, I've not really watched Boutte. Obviously, he owns a version of the world title, so I saw it as a 50-50 fight. But I think it was pretty evident from the start of the fight that, that I didn't he looked quite rabbit in the headlights sort of thing. Boutte, he looked, a bit hesitant. He looked quite slow. And, fair play to Carl, he took advantage of the situation. He basically pressured him. He was determined, punching hard. And I was impressed. He had an impressive performance, to beat a version of the world titleist. It was impressive in the manner that he did it, He won in emphatic style.
And since then, there've been lots of debates about where Carl sits with regards to some of our great fighters. Ben, obviously, Eubank, Collins, and then generally regarded the top of the pile. You and Carl has suggested that perhaps that performance means that he's eclipsed everyone else's performances.
Yeah, well, on a personal thing, I think, listen, it was a good performance, but I think he's getting probably carried away by saying he's above everybody else in the pile. You have to remember that he got beaten emphatically a few months earlier against Andre Ward, so, Carl's not even the best in the division, but, to say he's eclipsed, not just myself, but Ben and Eubank, I think is a bit premature. In saying that sort of thing,
What was your take on the situation with Ben and Eubank and Collins? Obviously, you came about just at the end. I know you beat Eubank, but it was at the start of your career, the end of his career, and the Collins fight never happened. You never ever suggested that you were streets or heads above all of them, did you?
Well, I don't suggest that. The thing is, I think with Carl, he likes to, say he's a legend and he's great and he's everything else. He loves to talk himself up a lot. I like to do my talking in the ring, and obviously, undefeated and being a world champion for over a decade, and beating some top-line fighters. I think you can't really call yourself a great fighter until you sort of unify the title and be the best in the division. And I like to think I was the best two divisions, although I only was light heavyweight champion, ring champion for a brief spell before I retired. But Hopkins was top-line fighter and was number one in the division, one of the best pound for pound in the world when I beat him. So I don't really go around and call myself a legend. I let people make their own assumptions, and I don't really compare myself to fighters of the past like Ben, Eubank and Collins. They're great fighters, and to me, I don't really want to say I'm a better fighter. I let the public and let people at the end of your career decide who's the best and who's the best fighter in the division, and it's up to everybody's own perception, and everybody can have their own opinion. But, like I said, on the positive, it was a good performance.
Sure.
But like I said, I think he has to unify the title and basically be the best in the division before he starts making comments of being the greatest super middleweight this country's produced,
It does seem to make sense. Let me ask you this, Joe. Just when you first, after you beat Roy Jones, late 2008 and into 2009, when Carl had just won the world title, was there a point there in that first 6 months to 9 months of your retirement where you considered coming back? Was there a point at that time? Not now. I mean, in that 8 or 9 month period.
Well, there's always in the back of your mind, but I have to be honest, I know Carl talks a good one, but at the end of the day, he just held a version of the world title, and to be honest, he keeps banging on about me never fighting him and never getting the opportunity, and he challenged me. But the thing is, at that stage, Mikkel Kessler was 39-0 and held the WBC and WBA title. So no offense to Carl, but obviously Mikkel Kessler was a much bigger fighter. After Mikkel Kessler, Hopkins was the big fish out of the Ring Magazine champion, just beat the number one in the world at that stage. So I just wanted to fight the best. Obviously, Carl has gone on since I retired, and he's done great, and he's took part in the Super Sixes that obviously wasn't around in my days. I wish they were, because it would have been fantastic for my super middleweight division to get the Super Sixes. It would have made big names of so-called champions and former champions, obviously, that took part in the Super Six. So yeah, that's that really. But no, obviously I look back and it was this is like 3 years ago now, and he's still doing well. But I think that obviously he has to really fight the likes of Andrew Ward, who's actually the number one in the division, at super middleweight tournament, and one of the big fighters are light heavyweight. I think to take that next step up in his career, it was a good performance. But I think let's not take things out of context. He beat a fighter that's never really been tested, never stepped outside of Canada. And although it was a very good performance, I think you have to put things in perspective, Yeah,
listen, so do I. Listen, Joe, before I let you go, he stands alongside the great British super middleweight. So what I decided to do was a little bit of research. So I opened up my Twitter, which is @BigDaddyBunts, and I had hundreds of replies. In fact, it could be up to about 1,000 by the time we go off air tonight. It was quite simple. I just asked who he should fight or stroke where he stood. Anyway, here's a sample. Ashley Fearfane is @Ashley Fearfane, the former British light welterweight champion. He said, in my opinion, Carl Froch is the best British super middle of all time. And James Austin, 71, agreed with him. And most people, it seemed to me, wanted to see Carl against Steve Collins. Certainly Luke, my 2358684, boxing writer, Berry Collin, Vicky Makeup, Tone Stotts, Lee Murta, Michael Going, all fancied him against Steve Collins. Link Box, Saeed Afzat, Tommy Bateson, Billy Harvey, K Chris 82, Craig Owen 11, Barry John, Chris Wads, and Stu Casely. They all went for Nigel Benn. Bobby Rimmer, the trainer from Manchester, and Barkari Jama, who runs a community radio show up there in Manchester, and a very good one too. He said, the only person I see beating Froch would be Ben. Scott 8458 said Calzaghe, Ben Eubank, Watson, Reed in their prime will all beat him, and Ben stops him. Sugar Ray 88, Gary Doherty, and Marosco 93 said Calzaghe against Froch would be a stunner. Ham 17 said he's not quite above Calzaghe, he needs to avenge his Kessler loss. Budgie 1980 EFC and Studney Jones said Froch will always be in Calzaghe's shadow. And CJSN 1982 said Calzaghe's chin would have been too much. Now, this mob said that Calzaghe would box his ears off. It's a big one. Tyrone Virone, Dizzy KG, Mina 1, Jay Windsor, JKD Rob, Jamie Bills 1, Michael Hills 47, Carl Scott 99, Martin 11, Lewis 11, Jay Haribo, Ben the Spark, Chris M. Websey, Monster 1980, Alex Pemberton all thought that Calzaghe would box his ears off. Dave Griff 1984 and McNamara 89. Froch would have destroyed Joe Calzaghe, those two say. All Walks, Connor's Official and Ivan Drago in 1999 said Eubank, that would be the fascinating fight. Woodis said Calzaghe, just to show people how close it would be. Woodis, that's a good shout if you don't mind me saying so. And It's Always Dan said Froch and DeGale 2014, Bunsey, how about that? And Chris Mason TV's gone old school on me. Tony Simpson, who of course was a middleweight, but if he was boxing now, Mr. Mason, the darts commentator, former player, yes, he would be fighting at super middle. And Joey Lippett says Michael Watson, who of course was a middle, his last fight was at super middle, September 21st, 1991, Spurs against Chris Eubank for the vacant WBO super middleweight title. Of course, if Watson was fighting now, he'd also be a super middle. I'm convinced of it. Jimmy Mallon says Ben at his peak, and he says I pick Carl, and I'm a massive Ben fan. And Sean Brown, who does a lot of work for Dave Caldwell, he says, what about Great Britain's first world super middleweight champion, Murray Sutherland, who I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was born in Scotland? And Baz Ladd says Froch beats Ben and Woodall. Froch loses to Eubank and Calzaghe, and he draws with Collins. Baz, you've given that plenty of fault. And Brian King 80 says Calzaghe and Eubank beat him, and Carl's chin would not be able to deal with Ben. So what's overwhelming here, looking at that kind of survey of 50 or 60 names I've read out there, is that at least he belongs in that company. And that's something I agree with, is that that's where he belongs. I can see Calzaghe's frustration there, because Joe was never one to come out of the ring and say, I'd knock out Ben, I'd knock out Eubank, I'd knock out Watson. It was a bit lively at the start of his career. By the time he got to his late 20s, he'd mellowed out. And perhaps that's about the only foot that Carl Froch put wrong last weekend and all week, was suggesting that he was better than all of those guys. Just being in their company is enough. Those are not just great British fighters, not just great super middleweights. They were great fighters, period. And to be connected to them, in my opinion, is more than enough.